What we have coming up today is we are going to talk all about stress. And I think when we say the word stress, it is something that everybody feels like they know because we all, as humans, have stress. It is something that is unavoidable. And so today, what we want to do is we're going to break stress down into three basic categories. We're going to talk about short-term, acute stress. We will talk about medium, or what they call episodic stress. And then we will talk about long-term and chronic stress. And we will talk about the biological implications on your body. We will also talk about ways to combat stress. Then at the end of our session, Steve, you are going to spend a little bit of time getting into the different things that can drive stress, right? Human behaviors that can drive stress. And we will have a special guest on, one of our Holistic Buffet members, who is an expert in all things physical about the body. He does amazing work, and I don't even want to call him a masseuse because he is so much more than that. But we will have John Fink on to talk about how stress manifests in the physical. So it's going to be a jam-packed episode, but it's going to be great and exciting. And when I was doing my work to curate the topics for today, I came across some things that were a little like mind-blowing for me that I didn't necessarily know, about short-term stress. And so I want to share those things today as well. Stress is, in many cases, an automatic response to stimulus in your environment. The good news about stress is that although it is automatic, we also have an internal system called a parasympathetic system that can reverse stress in real time. We just have to be aware of it. So stress can obviously be physical. It can be, if I took you, Steve, without a jacket and put you out in the middle of the night where you live in cold, cold England, that would cause physical stress on your body. Even if you like the cold at some point, you would feel stress. If I were to come up behind you and surprise you, you would feel certain physical responses that would be physical stress responses. And of course, we have emotional responses to stress as well. What we will talk about first is the short or acute stress. Okay, so let's start there. And I think that it is cultural for all of us when we hear the word stress to assume that stress is a bad thing. Let's remember, especially when it comes to short or acute stress, that it can be a good thing. There is something called eustress. And that can be a kind of stress that you experience even though you are not in a negative state or having negative stimulus. For example, if you were to do a cycling race, if I told you that in 5 minutes you're going to get on your bike and be in a cycling race, you could have stress stimulus, but they might be excitement, right? Which also releases the same hormones in your body as if someone, held you up with a gun, let's say. So the feelings that we get when we enter into short-term or acute stress, and let's define how long, for those that like specificity, how long are we talking about when you're in acute stress? It can be minutes to maybe a couple of hours, right? That's how long acute stress is before our system re-regulates. So when we are placed into a situation of acute stress, you're sitting at your desk and you get a call from your boss who wants to talk to you, or you get a message from a friend that says they're upset with you, and you immediately feel a stress. These are triggers, and we immediately feel a stimuli. Those are produced through our limbic system in our brain. And what our brain does is say we are in a fight or flight situation. And what the brain is doing is it is keying your body to produce epinephrine or adrenaline. And when our body produces epinephrine or adrenaline, it is basically telling us, do something. But it is really important for everybody to know that short-term or acute stress can be controlled by you as long as you can recognize it and implement some techniques. Now, there's a couple things that don't work. One of the things that really doesn't work is you feel yourself all worked up, and then you say to yourself, calm down. Or you say to someone else, oh, please calm down. That does not work, because telling you to calm down is asking you to use your brain to control your body. And when you are in a short-term or acute stress situation, that doesn't work, which is also why a lot of the pop culture terms such as meditation, mindfulness, when you're in an acute stress situation, also will not work, right? Well, let's move on to medium or what we call episodic stress. And medium or episodic stress is something that you sort of know it's coming. So you have a long project at work. You're getting ready to run the gauntlet. This could be anywhere from a couple of days of a stressful situation. You have an injury, right? That you are going to be in pain for an extended period of time trying to recover. And so we know that we are getting ready to enter into a phase that is going to be really taxing for us. And so episodic stress lasts anywhere from a couple of days to maybe a couple of weeks or a month, right? So what this becomes about is being aware that you're in a zone where you're going to have some long-term stress, and using certain modalities to widen your, what I like to call the okay zone, right? So you're in an episode of life happening that you know is creating stress within your body, and all of those short-term sensory tools that we discussed are relevant. But there's also some things that you can do in episodic stress that can help widen your okay zone so that you're better capable of handling the situation that is in front of you. So let's talk about what we call long-term, right, or chronic stress. This is stress that runs more than a few weeks or into a few months. This is unresolved issues or traumas that put us into a cyclical state of having elevated levels of cortisol and adrenaline in our systems. Now, adrenaline serves a good purpose and a bad purpose. I mean, adrenaline, and we talked when we were discussing short-term stress, we talked about how you can use your breath to calm yourself, and also use your breath how to elevate or force an adrenaline rush in your body. Adrenaline in short doses is not bad. It's actually really great for your immune system. There have been studies that have been done where if people are feeling like they might be coming down with something, they do some of the short inhales and exhales, and there's different names for those types of breathing routines that can increase adrenaline in your body.
And let's face it as well, Carrie, if you're walking across the street and a car's coming towards you, having a fight or flight response is a pretty handy thing to have, right?
It's a good thing to have, right? But when we get into long-term stress, then we start to see some significant impacts to our body, right? How many times have you heard of someone saying, oh, I've been planning this vacation forever and I just worked so hard, and then we went away on vacation and I got sick? It's because your body has been running in an elevated state of adrenaline for so long, and then you finally get relaxed, the adrenaline crashes, and then all of the other hormones in your body that have been competing for the cholesterol or whatever else hormones need to actually be produced are finally getting their chance to speak, because adrenaline has finally backed off and isn't overtaking everything. So when that happens, we see things like people who struggle to sleep. They have insomnia. They are unable to settle themselves at night. Lack of sleep is incredibly difficult for the body, because the body repairs itself at night, and it can't do that without sleep. We see people with digestive issues. We talked about what happens to your body when you are at a elevated level of adrenaline. your blood is rushing to your heart and to your legs and to all the places that are fight or flight. It's not in your stomach. So when you eat a big meal and you're in a constant state of high stress and the adrenaline is blocking your stomach from doing its job, that's where we see digestive issues. Elevated adrenaline is not good for your heart. It can actually damage blood vessels because the blood vessels in your heart are constantly dilated, which can lead to heart disease, which, as we all know, is the biggest killer, right? And then it can lead to mental health issues. And we also see individuals who have chronic long-term stress. They tend to be individuals that feel very isolated as well. So a couple of things with long-term stress and long-term stress. Yes, you can use all of the tools that we've talked about before, but long-term stress also gets into more of the cognitive behavioral therapy of figuring out how we deal with some of these things that are deeply embedded in our systems that need to be released. We've talked about movement and how important any form of exercise is for the body in combating long-term stress. We've talked about sleep. It is really important for everybody to know how damaging it is to sleep with your cell phone or your Alexa next to your bed. There have been studies that have shown that there is energy that is emitted by any technical device. Even a TV that is turned off emits energy into your area that is absorbed by your body. The light that comes off of a TV screen, a computer, a laptop, an iPad, or a phone can really mess with your sleep patterns, because what it does is it tells your body it is not time for sleep. I know.
How do I close off my fevered mind at night then? Okay, that's a different
yeah
thing.
I would be curious for you, and not to read some scary horror story type of book, but something that is relaxing for 20 or 30 minutes before you go to bed. So obviously I had, and so did Olivia, this traumatic experience. We ended up safe and the police showed up and the individual was apprehended. But it left me with some stress that I didn't realize was still in existence for a period of time. And what happened was I started being very aware of where I was in public all the time. I didn't want to go to the park. If I went to the mall, I always looked for where the exit was. But what happened is, without some cognitive behavioral therapy to understand that I actually was safe and I was in a safe environment, I was constantly living in a state of panic, waiting for a gun to go off. And if an air conditioning unit went off and I could feel that rumble, it would flag things in me right away.
Yeah.
So that is an example of how a short-term stressor can, and it doesn't have to be that dramatic. That was a very dramatic story. But that is an example of how a short-term stressor can turn into long-term stress, and then require some additional unpacking of that sort of behavior. The important thing, again, I'm going to bring it back to, is awareness, right? Is being aware. We can manage and treat stress, both short-term and acute, episodic, medium-term stress, and then long as we're sort of aware of where our stressors are coming from.
There was a study done relating specifically to trauma, and it's a slightly different extreme, but I think it puts the point across that you've made around. So there's a study done at Massachusetts General Hospital, and I'm reading this now, showed that women who'd been victims of abuse from an early age had abnormalities in something called their CD45 RA and RO cells, or RA and RO cells. The CD45 cells basically act as the memory cells for our immune system. So they had abnormalities in that part of them, right? So abnormalities in their memory cells of their immune system. The RA cells specifically protect against previously experienced toxins. So that's the RA. The RO protect against new toxins. So the study showed that the ladies who'd experienced abuse from an early age, they had more RA cells that fired off when there were no toxins present, right? So that protective toxin that cell that protects you and reminds you, hey, we've been here before, by the way, do something to protect yourself, was present. So essentially it was at a heightened sense of awareness the whole time. And they found it difficult to determine danger from safety. So they always felt in danger. And the point that he made in the book was, biologically, the past was impressed on their mind, but also at a cellular level in their bodies. So it wasn't just simply a case of the cognitive side of things. It was that deep trauma for years was impressed upon them at a cellular level. And now we're joined by our friend and Holistic Buffet dinner member. It's our friend John Fink. Hello, John.
Hi, Steve.
What is it you do for a living?
Well, I've been a massage therapist for about 24 years now. And that has expanded into, doing other things, because you treat the body holistically. So not just rubbing the muscles, but we talk about, how someone navigates through the world with stress and with, health and nutrition and all of these things. So it tends to spill over, because that's just the nature of the work.
And I would imagine that your practice really revolves around managing patients who are in episodic or long-term stress. And we're just curious what you see and what advice you might have for the Holistic Buffet crew.
Well, the thing that stands out to me is that, yes, they are all tied to each other, but do not rule out using a short-term solution to try and chip away at a long-term stressor.
Okay.
Because they're so tied to each other, you may have this main, sort of monolithic trauma in your life. And then there are all these little, what I call satellite tensions, or that kind of buttress it and help keep it in place. Because it is so, you're talking in a negative sense, it's holding it in place for you. So sometimes it's just too much to even focus on that entire trauma. And so you do have to kind of chip away at the little guy wires and the little support beams and stuff before that can even start moving out of your life. And then, to even consider that the long-term stress, it may still be there even after you resolve it. You may still have a scar for the rest of your life. So don't artificially impose a timeline on your healing. I think that's
because that causes more stress.
Absolutely. And it's not, it's going to happen in its own time. And you have to be able to have the, I guess, for lack of a better expression, faith that that's going to happen.
So remembering that our bodies are designed to move.
Very much so. We are not designed to be slouched over a computer all day, or,
Right.
low back, kicked forward on a couch, playing video games.
Before we have to let you go, we wanted to talk a little bit about with you, John, you and I took a little bit of a quiz. And yes. Steve gave us a quiz to take, and we have our results. And so, Steve, I'm going to hand it over to you to talk about what the quiz is and how we would like all of our guests to take the quiz, and then how we can use it to combat stress.
Now, this is a questionnaire, like any psychological model. It's a lens. It's just one way of viewing certain kinds of behavior, or in this circumstance, drivers of stress. Now, this specific questionnaire comes from a psychotherapist, psychoanalyst called Carla, who in 1975 devised this questionnaire that helped us understand some of the common drivers or triggers that motivate us, which can, when overdone, can cause us an enormous amount of stress. So when we're in our normal everyday working life, we tend not to show these so overtly or explicitly, but they're kind of there. But when we're under extreme amounts of pressure and stress, these come out a little bit more abundantly. So it helps identify which specific drivers you exhibit most, And it comes from the school of thought of something called transactional analysis that I was trained in 20 odd years ago, from a guy called Eric Byrne. It's fascinating. We will touch on this. It's a really good way of analyzing relationships. Let me ask our guest first, if that's possible. John,
Absolutely.
which one or ones, because we experience all of them at some point, but which ones
Yeah.
were predominant for you?
Okay, so I'm just going to preface this by saying my my industry that I'm in sort of predisposes me to all of these. So all of mine are above 3. But the one that Sky scored the highest was the please people.
Please people. Great.
Absolutely.
Okay.
That was 4.5 for me.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So we'll
Wow,
break
that's
this
high.
down and give a bit more context and a bit more explanation in a moment. But Carrie, what were yours?
So mine was the same as John's. My highest score, which was a 3.5, was people pleasing. And then my secondary were being perfect and hurrying. And you're smiling, Steve. I don't know what that means, but I'm not going to take that personally. I'm going to let that go. I'm going to let you hold that all on your own.
I'm going to hold it. John, and what about you? So you said pretty much
yeah.
all of them, and we do. We
Yeah.
experience all of them all, at varying degree.
I think my lowest scoring one was be perfect.
Okay.
I think just as a person that does not fit in this world because of my unusual size, that was something I was like, I can't be perfect. There's no way. But yeah, the please people was definitely my highest one. And then my 2 second places would be strong and try hard.
I think somebody who's got a very strict job, who has to act a certain way, may show different behavior from under stress circumstances when they're in the work and home. So I'm going to share with you now the explanations. And what I want to do is just really look at how these manifest you can kind of relate to. So I'm going to share this on screen now. So John, you're please people. So let's see if this resonates for you. So you find conflict may be difficult. You enjoy helping people. You put up with things so you don't rock the boat, and find it hard to give feedback and upset others. What relates there? What's your reflections there?
I can say that the top 3 are sort of my inescapable. If that was going to be those 3 things would be on my headstone, I would assume. I'm finding the last one starting to be a little bit more movable for me as I get older. I'm finding that I'm allowing myself to be a little bit more of the crotchety old man. So I'm caring less about telling people that, they're not being smart or stuff like that.
All right, so let's look at the next part of this, which is, let me move this down. And this is around likely stressors. Okay, so for you guys, so being stressed by being ignored or criticized, fear of upsetting others, accept work from others, maybe take on board other people's stuff, do stuff unconditionally and just go, yeah, okay, I'll do it and be put upon. Lose touch with your own priorities. So you'll put your own needs and priorities to the side to help someone else. And you maybe attempt to read other people's minds, maybe read into things. Is he thinking this? Is this person doing this because of this? So almost look for intentions or look for drivers of somebody else's, putting tasks and stuff on you. Any of that relate?
100%. I especially the attempt to read others' minds. One of the things that I've gotten into is trying to catch that. And so I've had this little self-talk phrase that I tell myself, and it really works great, is I say, John, you're telling yourself ghost stories right now.
Exactly. And what about you, Carrie? So become more emotional, can't respond to demands and be logical. Demands to be logical, and then unable to say no, and an increased need to rescue people. You relate to that?
Yes. But I think it's all so tied together for me. So I do have an inability to say no to people. And the reason that I don't say no to people, that I have trouble saying no to people, is because then I assume I'm doing something that isn't going to make them happy. By me saying no, They're not going to understand my life or my boundaries, and accept, I guess, why.
Yeah. And when I go through, when I look at mine, and mine tend to come up as try hard, and that from, I immediately go into activity. Let me go and make something. I'll go and do a video, or I'll do I immediately go into behavior. Mine are be strong. So I'll hide a lot of emotion.
That's what I had you pegged for, was the be strong and try hard, which I thought those would be your top two.
Oh, 4s in both of them, like straight up. 4s, maybe 4.5, depending on the situation.
Okay.
But and the real elements, mate, not so much, but I recognize that in that thing. So that, and do you know what? It's a lens, right? So it's just a spotlight. It's not particularly nuanced. It's very broad. It's like saying, which character from bloody Sex and the City are you? I'm a bit Samantha, but I'm also a bit of Carrie, whatever. Thank you so much, John. Do you find that exercise interesting, though? What was any feedback on that? Any reflection from you two?
I loved it. I thought it really kind of allowed me, like you said, looking at my own life stress through a lens. I certainly have my own path with that, with, like I said, the domestic violence thing, and then dealing with Crohn's disease. I have Crohn's disease. So basically any emotional stress, when it gets to a point, will start to express itself physically. And so that's sort of my little built-in guardrail that I've forced myself to work with.
Yeah. How about you, Carrie?
For me, I am going to take it again. I feel like I should take it again, possibly with a different lens. And I, in wrapping up this whole conversation on stress, I can't express to people enough how much stress manifests in your body. And the reason that I've been studying it for so long is that I lost a child and had severe PTSD and depression as a result of it, while I was also raising a twin, right? So there was like that double whammy of being a mom for the first time and also grieving the loss of a child at the first time too. And I did do cognitive behavioral therapy, and it did help, but it took me a journey of 4.5 years of therapy before I realized, and this is partly why Steve and I use this term, and we name this podcast the holistic buffet, because you can't treat the brain and not the body. Absolutely. Or the spirit. And so at a certain point, I moved away from just doing cognitive behavioral therapy and into other modalities that were spiritual. And this is where I got into all of the somatic studying of how we can actually use the senses that we have to regulate what is happening in our physical body.
Yeah.
So
I've become fascinated with it, and it's opened up such a world through your interest, because I want to understand the kind of stuff that you're into, but also for this episode. And it's just really made me go, oh, this is good stuff. Like EDMR, EMDR, right? Eye movement desensitization.
Yeah. EMDR. But EMDR, the reality of it is, and the magic of this is that if somebody told you you can control what is happening, right, with your body, you can control a stress response. I don't think most people know that. I don't think that they realize that you have these tools, your senses, and the interaction between your body and your brain as a way of regulating your autonomic nervous system. And for me, a big part of understanding, somatic response was because there was no alternative for me. I had done all the cognitive behavioral therapy, and I was still on massive amounts of medication because I hadn't dealt with the trauma that lived in my body. And I didn't know how to recognize it, and I didn't know how to release it. So I hope that today we did an okay job categorizing the different levels of stress, talking through some of the things you can do to combat stress and learn how to live with stress, right, together, because it will always be there as we go through our lives. understanding how stress manifests itself in the body. And thanks for all of your insights today, John. And then
Pleasure.
also taking a look at some of your tendencies and your behaviors towards stress. Make sure you do the exercise that Steve sent out. And then we look so forward to getting feedback from all of our listeners, whether that is on our community page at Patreon. You can make comments underneath the episode where we post it. And we hope to see everybody on our live stream at the end of this month so we can all share more about working with stress. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today on this episode of Stress. And we look forward to seeing you at our live stream brunch at the end of the month.
And don't forget Holistic Buffet. It's a place where we give you a meze for the mind, a banquet for the body, and soup for the soul. So let's hear it. Carrie, where are we?
At Steve and Carrie's Holistic Buffet.
Yeah!
We did it finally, and it didn't sound horrible.